And we are live.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Conscious Living Radio, 100.5 FM in Vancouver, Co-op Radio on Wednesday nights, 6 to 7 p.m. And of course, we're also recording live right now on Facebook. You can listen to the interview after the fact as well at www.consciouslivingradio.org. That's where all the podcasts are. So welcome. I'm here with Mark Caron. And VIFF, as we were talking about last week, the Vancouver International Film Festival is coming really soon, September 29th to October 9th. So we're talking with a lot of filmmakers. This film, I really enjoyed it. It's called Rebellion. We're speaking with filmmakers Maia, Kenworthy, and Elena Sánchez Bellot about their film Rebellion. It's a Canadian premiere here at VIFF. Maia is an independent filmmaker from London who's spent the last 4 years immersed in the world of activism. Elena is co-director of the film, Spanish roots, but also based out of London, and she's keen on capturing all the complicated ways in which we are human. Rebellion is their first feature film for both of them, follows the organic farmer Roger Hallam, who in 2018 decided enough was enough, no more petitions or compromises. If he was going to save the planet, it was time to disrupt the economy and hit the powerful where it hurt. It was time to get arrested. So Extinction Rebellion, the environmental protest movement, was born, certainly brought a new urgency into climate activism. By April 2019, the movement was strong enough to block traffic in London for several days. Over 1,000 supporters were arrested. And before the week was up in the UK, it became the first industrial nation to declare a climate emergency. So while the film documents that process and its intention to disrupt and get arrested, there's another slant to the film as well that for me is certainly worth talking about. We're going to examine what actually happened, what is happening, and perhaps the most effective way to create change. So welcome to the show, you two.
Hi, thanks for having us.
So maybe let's start personally, both of you. What's your background? What is it that inspired you to make this film?
Well, we were friends before making this film. We both did an MA, a master's in filmmaking, and met and had made short films together and, you know, done odd jobs. But this was, very much our first big project. And it kind of fell into our lap because a friend of ours had made a film on Occupy and had then, unsurprisingly, some of those members had gone into Extinction Rebellion. And so she'd gone along to one of those early meetings and thought, this is interesting. This seems exciting, this new group, and did a call out. And we were the two that went, oh, okay, we'll go along to the next meeting. And I mean, we didn't really, we just thought, we were curious and thought we'd see what would happen, and very quickly started meeting lots of different people who were joining this group. And it challenged some of our assumptions, I think, about activism, especially environmental activism. And especially when we met Farhana Yamin, who's a environmental lawyer, been part of the UN for decades. I think I'd naively thought that the UN was sort of, working things out and it was going to be okay. And then to sort of really hear things from an insider like her and realize, oh, right, that is not working. You're joining this activist group. I see, I think that kind of like woke us up and it kept us, interested, and we kept coming back, and we just kind of decided to commit to keep showing up and see what happened, because it felt like something might.
Right. Was it clear from the beginning that, Roger said, if you're not in prison, you're not in resistance. Was it that clear that getting arrested would be the key metric that would measure success or some sort of success from the beginning?
Sorry. It was clear that was one of the main tactics. The tactic is nonviolent civil disobedience, nonviolent direct action. But the thing that maybe people who aren't in that world know is that for every person that gets arrested, there's between 8 and 20 people working behind the scenes for that to be able to happen. And those are not people that are getting arrested, and it's people who are doing the legal support, who are doing the social media, who are giving the people that are locked on water, blankets, who are picking people up from police stations. So it was always clear that there were many, many other roles that people could have if they couldn't risk arrest. Arrests are also usually what the media focus on, so it's, you know, what gets the most photos and videos on the news. So yeah, it certainly was a main tactic, but it didn't mean that everyone in the group had to get arrested. There were many, many other roles as well.
Mm-hmm. And before we started recording, we were talking about, you know, one of the pieces of the film that for me was particularly impactful was, and what arose for me was the simple question, can you make change? Can you solve a problem using a template or a methodology that is also involved in creating it? So specifically what I'm talking about is when you look at all the global problems, there's a very, very much an individual reaction. And here's what I'm doing to, you know, there's an I. And certainly the way you portrayed Roger in your film was he was very individualistic. He had an agenda, he knew what he was doing, and he was advocating intensely for it. And so part of what I saw in that film was everyone else kind of either afraid to bring their agenda up or not being considered. And so if we can broaden that into a discussion about how change happens and whether the template one uses to create change requires a kind of shift in our thinking, because Roger's thinking beyond the context, I understand his intention was well-meaning, but the style of thinking felt very similar to just a different agenda to a corporation that would say, here's what I'm doing. And there was a personal agenda. So I'm not trying to put him down, but does my question make sense? I know I've rambled there a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was tricky because, you know, the situation, as I mentioned earlier, you know, things have been really difficult with the UN, with pushing forward, with politicians not listening, you know, or agreeing to something at the conference, but then going home and doing completely the opposite and listening to falsifiable interests. So there was a need for that sort of energy that Roger brings, you know, this disruptive new tactic, this mass civil disobedience. And he was a great mobilizer. He is a great mobilizer. He went all around the country, getting lots of people to listen and understand this new tactic. And lots of people signed up, and, you know, and it was really effective. And, you know, there were others who maybe have been working in the climate field for a long time through more sort of, you know, professional or legal avenues. And they were a bit hesitant and like, oh, I'm not sure. And this all seems a bit, you know, mad. And like, can we do this? And you sort of needed that pushy element that came through from Roger to say, yeah, let's give this a go. It's time. But then, of course, yeah, when a movement then it was in the limelight, it got lots more new followers and lots more voices and ideas coming into it. And ultimately civil disobedience is just one tool. It kind of, yeah, it becomes a problem then if that keeps getting put on the table as the only thing we can be doing to tackle a crisis, which is so complicated and isn't just about emissions, right? Like, it's ultimately the fact that we have a political and economic system, certainly in the global north, I mean, it's everywhere now, that is causing so much destruction, not just to our, you know, ecosystems, but to our communities. There's so many things that need to change. So yeah, of course, direct action, civil disobedience, that alone, and also specifically the way Roger, you know, wanted things to be done, that can't be everything. You can't put it all in that basket, and you have to keep listening to new ideas and people who are also experiencing these things on the front lines and have been, you know, resisting for so many generations and have all that wisdom. Yeah, of course. And it's a tension that I think in XR it's got better, and they've brought in, you know, new voices and new ways of operating, and climate justice has actually become much more central to their way of thinking. But it's still something that I think, yeah, the movement will grapple with.
What would you change? What else would you change based on, I mean, there's what you saw in the film. What else would you change? Because there, in terms of his relationship with his daughter, there wasn't, it didn't feel like she was received by her dad being Roger. What about that element? Do you feel the movement has changed to be more, I don't want to just say inclusive, but to me, if everyone's reality isn't equally valuable, that's the thing I'm talking about that struck me going, somehow it has to be, everybody has to be equally valuable. If you've got a hierarchy within the movement that is very, very strong. Aren't you perpetuating that whole paradigm of what's wrong in the world? That's what I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of ironic in a way, because movements like XR, claim to be non-hierarchical and horizontal, and actually often what happens is that then the kind of natural hierarchy that we experience in society ends up happening, like whose voices are being heard the most. I don't know. I think your first question kind of makes me think of that famous Audre Lorde quote of like, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And I think that, we need so much imagination and creativity to build a new world, a new system. And there are many people doing that and have been doing it for a really long time. And one of the key things at the base of that are relationships. But the thing is that building relationships is unshowy, unglamorous, and not
messy.
a fast thing, Often, we get asked, why did you show these messy parts of organizing and of XR? And first of all, because it was happening. And second of all, because we don't actually think that messiness is necessarily a bad thing. When things are messy, it means that you have different people at the table bringing different things to the table. You don't want a room full of yes men. And there's a lot of creativity in messiness, and lots of things can come of it. But I think that, like the film clearly shows, and, anyone who's been in any kind of relationship in their lives, conflict arises sooner rather than later. And we need to learn how to deal with different kinds of conflict, because that is going to be our reality. And the way that you deal with conflict is through having trusting relationships where you know that the other person isn't, out to hurt you or anything like that. And you can work through those things. But that takes time, and it's slow, and it's not, like I said, it's not kind of like the showy side of activism of getting arrested and being in the front page of the newspaper. And I think the other thing that we need a lot of, especially in this part of the world, is a lot of humility and a lot of listening to other movements, to other people that have been doing this for centuries, and who can teach us so much. The answers are mostly already out there. We just kind of need to listen and accept that we're just one piece of the puzzle, each of us, and all of us have our part to play, but it is one piece of the puzzle. The same solutions are not going to work everywhere. Someone like Farhana is spinning a million plates at any one time, because she knows that there's just like not one thing that's going to solve everything. But at the base of it, I think, is relationships to each other.
I love that. I love what you're saying. And then there's personal accountability for your part, period. I mean, if you know what your part is, and you can ask about somebody else's and not assume that because we don't. You get 10 people in a room, you've got 10 perceptions. But if you can clearly articulate yours without an attachment to being right, it's just what you experience, and you have that greater consciousness that also other people are perceiving differently, then you've got a healthy container. And that was what didn't seem to be in Rebellion Extinction in terms of personal relationships. Is there anything more you want to say about that other than what we saw in the film? Were you surprised by some of the things that were happening as it was unfolding?
I think one thing that I'll say, and something that we've talked about ad nauseum, Maia and so many other people, is there tends to be such a kind of like a hatred towards the word leadership or leaders or anything like that, and especially with organizations that want to be non-hierarchical, blah blah blah. And like Maia was saying before, like Roger's energy 1,000,000% had its place. Like he was a big part of making April 2019 happen, which put XR on the map. Got so many people involved in activism that, would have never been involved in activism otherwise. And, he played a really key role in that. And I think the problem with leadership is when it doesn't become cyclical and it doesn't evolve. And he was great for that part. And then someone else is great for the next part. And we need to get better at having cyclical leadership, structures in these movements.
And by cyclical leadership, you mean that it moves around who's kind of in charge in that moment?
It's like which person has the skills for this moment that we need, and who's also charismatic and is going to motivate people. Like, those are important aspects of it. And I don't think that people should be shunned for, taking up that space if they are, useful tools in that moment for the movement.
And of course,
go ahead, Maia.
Sorry, just also saying that things were changing, in only 6 months. The group basically did manage to, get all over the headlines and get that. So they had 3 demands, and the first one being tell the truth. And they had sort of crowdsourced ideas from the movement about what do you want us to put to the government? Now we've got their attention from our protest. What are we going to do? And they said, please, let's declare a climate emergency. And that happened. There was a citizens assembly that was also another demand that was set up. It wasn't legally binding, so it wasn't, it could have been much better, but still it was sort of one of their one of their demands was also another one was being addressed. And it kind of, it also had lots of new members coming in, but so the situation then, it's like, okay, now we need to reevaluate, look what we've managed to achieve, but like, where do we go next? What now are we doing? And I think that's where you see then in the film, like some of those younger voices coming in going, okay, now let's look at, the wider movement. What are other people doing? What's the sort of systemic change they're pushing for? What are they, also now we have a platform. Shouldn't we be talking about those things? Shouldn't we be, realigning? And that conversation ended up, it sort of disappeared because it did get eclipsed by the tactic that had launched the group, right. And that becoming the focus, because there were some key group of people, especially when you're co-founders, you already have there's power there as well. Naturally, people put that on you. So it did become very, very tricky, and it needed that moment to reflect and go, right, now what's our next step? How are we going to adapt to this changing situation?
Do you think it's generational too? The approach is somehow generational. Do you know what I mean by that? Do the different generations perceive how to step forward, how to create change differently?
I mean, I think younger generations, we've grown up in a world that I feel like we've been more aware of how connected we are to other people than previous generations because of the internet and because of social media and witnessing so many things that I think when my parents were teenagers, they definitely weren't as aware of other protests going on around the world as much as I was when I was a teenager. And the teenagers nowadays are way more informed than me when I was a teenager. So I think that definitely comes through. And I think that definitely came through in a lot of young people in XR. They wanted to be so clear about linking the climate crisis with racial justice, with economic justice, with gender justice, talking about colonialism, neocolonialism, like what are the roots of this problem? It's all symptoms of the same disease. If we, there's this kind of like amazing metaphor, which is like, if your bathtub is overflowing, you turn off the tap before you reach for the mop. So why do we keep reaching for the mop and not turning off the tap?
Right.
And I think that younger generations are I think just kind of more interlinked in that way, whereas I think maybe activists 30 40 years ago, and especially environmental activists in the West, white environmental activists have definitely been more siloed, and it's about emissions, it's about saving a specific species or whatever, which is commendable as well, but not kind of like connecting the dots in the same way that I think now you just can't not.
What do you think one of the most effective ways to dismantle, I mean, I'd use the word patriarchy. I mean, you can say colonialism, but to me, it's all patriarchal thinking, meaning that one is over the other. That model to me is inherently painfully wrong. Because somebody is over somebody, or something is over something. So whether it's over the planet, over the animals, or one man over woman, or whatever it is, any hierarchical a kind of structure. So in this case, I'd say patriarchy. What do you think is a very effective tool to dissolve that? I think I'm hearing you say that for sure it's got to be internal, right? We do need this internal revolution. If you don't do it there, how is it even remotely possible that it's going to happen externally? But I'm curious to see what you think is effective, what you found for yourselves, even that's been personally effective to kind of dissolve the paradigm that keeps one in a fixed perception that really is not healthy, loving, or considerate of the whole?
I mean,
I can.
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? Yeah, I think just always learning. I mean, I feel we're never going to stop learning. It's that mindset that can kind of what we've been talking about in this chat, that sort of when you're so rigid about something, that's often the problem of like, this is the way it is, but this is how the economy works, this is how society runs, this is how it's always been, and not being able to think out the box and, you know, be creative as well. I think that's sometimes missing, is that we all know, a lot of us know what's wrong and we can rail against it, but it's like, okay, but what's the alternative? What are we going to look to now? And so I think some of these discussions that I'm now beginning to see around degrowth, which for some sounds like a really terrifying thing, because wait, economic growth, isn't that tied to our well-being? And doesn't that, you know, that's at the heart of everything. And if we don't have economic growth, we're all going to suffer. And it's like, you know, pulling that apart and going, hang on a second, there's some confusions there, and actually look at what the alternative could be. And when I read some of those visions of like an alternative society around degrowth, it's like, that's really inspiring, and I can also begin to see it, and it's like something to step into, rather than just, you know, feeling the whole time like you're up against a wall, and it's kind of, you know, where are we going to go? Because I think, yeah, that was also, I think initially with XR, I was a lot of like hearing what was wrong and what needed to stop, and then it's like, okay, but now I'm much more interested in that, so what next? Like, where do we turn? Of course, then how you get into that, some of these visions, you're like, that sounds fantastic, but with these politicians and, you know, with the strength some of these companies, like, I don't know how we do then switch into it. But I think we should definitely be having those conversations that are really forward looking and creative.
I think just looking, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead, Elena.
No, I was just gonna say, like, we need to, it's like what Savannah says in the film, you know, we need to put different voices at the center. What are the people who don't benefit from the system we currently have doing, and how have they done things before, you know, and how do people do things differently? And there are so many different ways of living. They just don't make it into mainstream media. You know, there are many different ways of organizing, many different ways of running an economy, many different ways of being in community that are not about profit and extractivism, you know. And I think that there are so many examples around the world, and you need to seek out voices that challenge you and make you uncomfortable and lean into that. You need to be uncomfortable. And you also, I think a lot of us are so scared of messing up, saying the wrong thing, and then we don't do anything. We're just kind of like paralyzed in that fear, you know. Don't be, you know, we all mess up. It's better to do something, educate yourself. There are so many groups around you doing stuff around whatever it is that you feel passionate about. Look for them and join one, you know, learn what it is to be in a group, learn what it is to be in an organization. Is really fucking complicated, you know, and time consuming and also enriching and amazing. And I don't know, I think I'm like a hopeless, what's the word? God, I've been speaking Spanish for too long. Optimist. I'm like a hopeless optimist. And I love this quote by Angela Davis, you know, that's like, you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. And if you don't, then, you know, the people not doing that are the people benefiting from the way things are now.
Well, and there's a whole group who, when we think of the past movements, and there have been, you know, so many important movements, you know, against the war in Vietnam, or the women's movement, the civil rights movement. I mean, on and on. There were people who did put their lives on the line, literally, to stand up for what was right. And I want to talk about burnout, because there's burnout in your film with this particular group, but I think there's generational burnout. I think people have been optimistic, hopeful. You know, it's like John Lennon's song, Imagine. You know, that song, I still can't hear it without starting to cry, but I'm crying for a different reason. Before, when the song came out, I was crying because it was hopeful. And now I'm crying because I believe it's like a loss that it didn't happen, because it's been so long that I have, and I think there's a lot of people who have been advocating for change on so many levels, and they're tired. There's a kind of tiredness going, well, like a feeling of jumping back into, I see a cauldron, like when you were trying to define yourself as an optimist, and I saw you with this beautiful cauldron of messy, all kinds of people, but I saw you stirring the pot, like this beautiful witchy cauldron. And not afraid of that, going, yeah, the gems are in there, the juice is in there, and it's got to be, I agree with you, it's got to be messy. But what would you say? Let's talk a bit about burnout, both what you experience, what you see happening today, but also this piece I want to throw in, which is right across the generations. There are people who are tired, don't know what to do that makes sense to actually create change.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, before, when you said like what was one of the things that surprised you about making the film, one of the things that I thought was how similar it is to be an activist to be a documentary filmmaker, because you just end up immensely burnt out.
Right.
And I think, you know, we've had so many conversations with the people in the film that resonated with how we were feeling as well. And I think, you know, it's kind of like the life of an activist a lot of the time is to not see in your lifetime results for what you're fighting for, which is incredibly difficult. And I think that's why every person has to find a kind of individual reason for them that they're doing what they're doing and why they can't do anything else. Because if you are doing it for results or for a specific result, I think it can be really demotivating and really depressing ultimately. But I think that, you know, one of the things that a lot of the people in XR, and certainly the people in the film, have felt, you know, Savannah would tell us that she felt like she kind of had like a plastic bag around her head for so many years because she was so worried about everything that was going on, and no one around her seemed to kind of feel the same way. And then the first time she was in an XR meeting, it was like someone had like ripped open the bag and she could breathe, because people were saying, yeah, no, I feel the same way, you know. And often the XR protest people say, oh, you know, what are they for? And a lot of the XR members say, well, for me, like 2 weeks of being around people and protesting fuels me for the other 10 months where I'm on Zoom meetings and organizing and doing very unglamorous, very, you know, kind of the difficult work that you end up burnt out for doing. So on the one hand, I think there's that. And then on the other hand, yeah, I can't speak to how, you know, the people from the civil rights movement or the Vietnam War must feel. I think it must be really sad in some ways, and in other ways, lots of things were achieved. And if we go back to what I was saying before about relationships, I think that's what I always kind of stay with. And it's like, you know, what relationships have been forged now in XR, for example, and how many people have been connected through XR that wouldn't be connected otherwise, and what could that make flourish in some future, you know, these people that are now this sort of like mycelium all around the UK and in lots of places in the world that are connected, and they can be called in to the capital city when needs be, or you know, do more local actions and work on local issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Maia, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think Elena's covered a lot there, but the thing that I think it boils down to a lot is relationships and community. Like, you know, we also have spoken about on this conversation, it's really, really key, because it is really, really hard work. It's like Elena says, you're not going to see a lot of wins. Celebrate them when they happen, the small ones as well, you know, that's important. I think sometimes there was that problem in XR where it would feel, you know, Roger definitely was someone who would go, yeah, okay, you've had a climate emergency declaration, oh, they've legislated for net zero, yeah, we've still got this huge mountain to climb, guys, keep going, you know, that endless beating of the drum. And I think sometimes, yeah, you need to just put it down and actually do give yourself a clap on the back and celebrate together and come together and, you know, feel good about it. And that was one of the things that was nice actually about releasing this film a couple of years on from the 2019 protests, which, you know, most of the film takes place then, is seeing the activists who were part of it and people who weren't, but who were kind of aware of it, but afterwards going, oh yeah, that was really great that we did that. And I think probably because of the pandemic and everything that's happened since then, you know, it's all a bit of a blur for us, isn't it? And there have been other distractions, but just to remember what people did, coming together and stopping London, and then that spreading around the world. You know, I think that's really, really important to buoy you again, so you can carry on. But also, yeah, the people, it's the people that you, and I think from making this film, you know, we're really proud of it, we're glad we've made it, but I think the thing that I'm happiest about is these new relationships, these people I've met, and what I've learned from them. And you know, just last night I was with Farhana and Sam, who are two of the people in the film, and we spoke a bit about, you know, activism and politics, but also we had a lovely dinner together, and that was really, you know, it's really special. And I know those are friendships that I'll keep, and that, yeah, they keep me going.
So it sounds like the movement then just becomes a part of your life, right? With the people, the community, whatever it is you're doing, it's just a part of your movement through life. Yes.
I think if it isn't, I don't know if it's sustainable.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and maybe that's part of the thing I was referring to before, is that there were so many intense movements, and then suddenly it stopped and it wasn't even being talked about. So that lack of community, all of a sudden your tribe's gone. Maybe. I have a question that might be a bit controversial. I'm hoping it'll be valuable instead of just controversial. I mean, civil disobedience is certainly born in the face of injustice. And we know it creates change. But what if the civil disobedience, the movement itself, rests on things that are not true? So, and that, you know, there are examples of movements that are created based on a false foundation of things that are happening that may not be happening. What about that? Is that, any thoughts on that?
I mean, are you saying that the climate crisis isn't true, or
no? Are you kidding? Are you kidding? No, I've shifted, but I mean, there are those people who say it's not true. That's for sure. There are factions of people who are saying many things that are not true these days, in my opinion. They're not based in fact. They're based on sometimes absolutely insane speculation. I really don't want to get specific, because that wasn't my intention. To me, it's just so obvious if you look out in the world that there are movements and groups of people who believe 100% in what they're perceiving as true. And I'm not talking about climate change or social injustice, because that's just so obvious. But, you know, I mean, Pizzagate, for example, or, you know, they're just, they're absurd. They're off the charts with no basis in reality whatsoever. What do you attribute? Why is that happening? I guess is really what it's just a conversation I want to have to see if there's something we can unpack in that level of reactivity, that what your thoughts are, you know, on that. And that's as diplomatic as I can be.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most interesting questions that I always ask people that I disagree with on big things is, what are you scared of? And I think that often gives me a lot of information about them, and I can understand them better. So I think that's kind of how I would begin to try and understand those movements or those people. I would try to understand what they're scared of and why they are using that as their preferred course of action, rather than, you know, like we're saying, turning to community. I always find it so interesting, like all these conspiracy theories that go on. And, you know, I recently watched that Flat Earther documentary on Netflix, and I was watching it with my sister, who's a scientist. And she kept telling me, like, these guys are devising really good experiments. They just don't believe the results. When the result comes back that the Earth isn't flat, they just don't believe it. And they say that there's a mistake in the experiment. You know, she was saying that the experiments that they're coming up with are really good. Like, they make so much sense. And I think the same when I think of all these people spouting conspiracy theories. I always think, you know, there's 4 companies in the world that basically own the world, like BlackRock and all these other, you know, supranational companies who have like, you know, the combined GDP of like, I think BlackRock has the combined GDP of like China and Japan. It's like insane. And that's actually a fact, right? And so I just find it so interesting that these people want to, talk about Pizzagate and not go against all these billionaires that are buying up the world.
Right.
And I would just want to take them and like redirect their eyes and be like, can you like focus on this? But I think that is really that's really overwhelming, right? Like it's the whole conversation we're having today. How can you change things? And there isn't a simple answer. There is a simple answer to thinking there's a pedophile at the basement of your pizza place, because then you can go and find him, and then you've done something, and you feel like you're in control. And I think that's what it kind of boils down to, you know, feeling like we can be in control of our own lives, and we can actually affect change that is quick and effective.
So you think fear and lack of control is kind of at the root or part of the foundation of what creates the need for those sorts of scapegoats, I guess you could say. Is that it?
Yeah, and people are being really influenced by a lot of mainstream media pieces that are so divisive and do loads of scapegoating, you know, and that was really evident quite quickly from filming this group, is that a lot of the mainstream media stuff didn't match up to what we were seeing on the inside. And we had one of our very first screenings in the UK actually was with lots of UK journalists were there, and the first thing one of them said to us was, oh wow, I didn't realize that whole Heathrow action was just like that group was doing it within XR, and all these other people were in opposition to it. And then there was that justice thing, and you could see them going, oh, I had no idea. And this is someone who's like, you know, talks about the news day in, day out. That's his job. And he just hadn't realized how a group like XR, which by this point, you know, it's known all around, you know, he knows all about it. And yet he doesn't realize that it's so much, you know, it's a complete mix of people in there. And I think that's, we felt quite, you know, I think that's where long form storytelling is really important. You know, having these pieces, you know, we really committed to telling a long, complicated story that, you know, gets you into much more of it's not the whole truth, because, you know, it's a huge movement and there's so many people and stories that couldn't make it in, but, you know, it's still giving you much of a fuller picture of what really was going on. Because otherwise, you're just getting these sort of very, especially with the sort of activist groups, they're either ridiculing them or, you know, at worst, they're actually making them out to be this dangerous threat to society. And they're really, unfortunately, there's these right-wing think tanks in this country that have really got very powerful. One of our senior advisors now, senior government advisor, has just come from one of them. And the summer that XR took off in the UK, had put out a report called Extinction Rebellion. You know, so there's a very conscious effort to try and malign activists, especially environmental activists, make them out to be a threat to society, a threat to people. And so that's where, I think it's important that you do have films like this, like Rebellion, that are going, actually, should we just show you what some of these people are like? Do you want to just come in and have a look for yourselves and see that some of these narratives are just rubbish, basically, and really, really damaging?
What do you think? What do you attribute that glitch in the media, that bias to? I mean, journalism used to be something that really did reflect, especially investigative journalism. It was like being a filmmaker. You went out, you got a story, you made sure the story was true, you checked your facts. Like there was, you know, that perhaps, what do you attribute the fact that it's just not happening that way today?
I mean,
I think it is happening that way. Yeah,
Sorry?
It's just that I think it is happening that way still. It's just that we're so much more inundated by so many sources, and the big, you know, kind of media conglomerates, you know, I think, I don't know the facts, but most of them are privately owned. There are very, very few that are kind of, you know, funded by subscribers and things like that. And those that are then have a much, much smaller reach. So I just think that, what people are kind of reading in the main newspapers or watching on TV is mostly, incredibly biased, because it's all bought, you know, by Rupert Murdoch and all his pals. Right. But there's definitely incredible journalists, you know, risking their lives, doing incredible work. I just think it's difficult sometimes to find it, and those same journalists are the ones speaking out against big media corporations because they make their job really difficult.
What do you think the future of Extinction Rebellion is? What's happening right now, and what's the future look like?
Well, the Queen died, which meant that everything in this country shut down, literally everything, including some protests. But I think that they're planning it's October this weekend, isn't it? And there are huge protests planned because we've got this cost of living crisis as well, and people are realizing, it's the same route as the climate crisis, and the same sort of solutions are needed. So I think there's a lot of gathering together of different groups, and I think October is just going to be full of protest. And even some mainstream charities at the moment in the UK are really speaking out against our new government and what they're doing, because they're looking now to just abandon nearly 600 laws from the EU that were protecting the natural world in the UK. Just get rid of them, or replace them, but basically water it down, so that you just open it up for development. So there's a lot. So to see these big NGOs actually be like, we are livid, we are so furious now, and we're going to start mobilizing, still going to see what that mobilization will look like for an NGO. But that mood is very much, in the air, that people are angry and wanting to get together and really protest, I think. So an XR is part of that. And we've had loads of union strikes all through the summer as well, which are going to continue again, especially the train strikes have been they've been stalled for a little bit, but they're picking up again. It's all, I think there's a lot of coming together, basically.
And is disrupting the economy still a factor, an important factor in that?
With Extinction Rebellion?
Mm-hmm.
I imagine they've got some quite disruptive plans. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We're not sort of at the center of it anymore, so I can't give any details. I don't know them.
Right.
But yes, I'm sure there's disruption on the cards. Yeah.
If someone's listening right now and they're going, okay, this is great, but I really don't know what to do, or what can I personally do to make a difference? I just want to hear from both of you. Anything that you think might inspire someone to begin to get involved.
I think, like I said before, find what you feel passionate about, and I guarantee there will be a group near you or online that are trying to do something about it. And I think even if it's just baby steps, you get involved in that, and then you realize that, oh, it's not as scary as I thought. Meeting new people and going to meetings and organizing things that don't have to be arrestable actions. There are many, many, many useful things to do. So I think that would be my number one thing, and kind of change your definition of what it means to be a citizen, what it means to be an active citizen, and what it is to, what does it mean to be responsible for yourself, for other people. And that doesn't mean go vote every 4 or 5 years. It means actually be an active citizen. And then in terms of tangible things, I was just talking about this today with my dad. One of the biggest things that you can do as an individual is change who you bank with, because banks fuel so much of the climate crisis and so many wars. And, so switching to a bank that doesn't invest in arms, they are rare, but they exist. That is a big thing that you can do. It has actually a bigger impact than you not flying or recycling, for example.
Yeah, and actually Sophie, who's in the film, she has gone on to set up an organization that's doing exactly that, it's called Switch It, and they've done all the research for you, and they look into, these are the ethical banks, these are the ones that are on the right tracks, maybe you want to switch to them, these are the bad guys. They just sort of lay it out really clearly for you, and look at energy providers as well.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's
really
brilliant. Because there's
really
so
helpful.
much greenwashing going on. There's so much of, corporations have sort of got with the program going, okay, here's what we got to do. So, we'll just, what is it, offset carbons, and so much of that is bogus. It's actually not happening the way they say it's happening. So Switch It, it's called. It's something that's online. That is it just for the UK or more global?
No, I think they're going global with it.
Awesome.
Yeah, definitely have a look. Switch It, it's called.
Okay. And Maia, do you have any words for listeners who are kind of unsure about how to get involved?
I think the main thing is to, like Elena said, find a group that looks interesting to you and just go along, start doing things in person, because yes, our phones can be a fantastic source of information and you can connect with people and learn and things, but that's just the first step, and it's so important to put them down, close your screens and get out and meet people. And really get to know each other, because otherwise you're because that's the other thing, sometimes that information is a bit of an onslaught and it can be so crippling, and you can feel, I've had nights recently where I'm just lying awake after half an hour on Twitter, just my mind's just completely gone, and it's just not healthy, and not that you have to draw a line eventually and stop and go and find people and do something about it. And it doesn't have to be going and getting arrested, but like Elena said at the beginning of this chat, like there are so many different roles out there within all kinds of movements, things you can be doing. It could be in the workplace even, that you can bring it. Farhana feels like everyone should have activists on their CV. It doesn't matter what you're doing, you can bring that energy into all kinds of spaces. But I think the key thing for me is putting the phone down and getting out the door, meeting people.
Awesome.
And you'll have fun then as well. You will.
Right.
You'll make new friends.
So your film, I just want to talk about for a sec, it's being screened at, I know on VIFF Connect, which means you could stay in your PJs and watch it at home. But also I encourage you, in the name of meeting people and getting connected, to go to the film festival. September 30th to October 9th is the whole festival. And your screenings are Sunday, October 2nd at 9 p.m. for those in Vancouver at SFU Woodwards, and then Monday, October 3rd, 3:45 at International Village. I wonder if are they going to have anyone doing Q&A or any kind of conversation involved when they're screening the film? Do you know, or after the film? We'll have to find out.
Actually, I'm not sure. We did do a recorded Q&A, but I think that's for the online version.
For the online version? Oh, they might play it after the movie. Maybe they'll play it in the theater too.
Yeah, not sure.
So I encourage everyone to go out and see it. It's called Rebellion, and loved it. Loved your film. Thank you for the work that you've done. What's next for you two personally?
Getting over burnout.
Say that again.
Recovering from burnout.
Yeah.
We're still working on it a bit. I'm doing some outreach for the film, so making lots of community screenings happen, and student societies, letting them know about it and sending the film off and that sort of thing.
Well, best of luck. If anything else that you want some coverage on comes up, please let us know. We'd love to have you back. And
thank you
so much.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It was great.
We've been speaking about the film Rebellion with Maia Kenworthy and Elena Sánchez Bellot at the Canadian premiere at VIFF. More information at www.consciouslivingradio.org. And the show, of course, is on Wednesday night, 6 to 7 p.m. on Co-op Radio. Thanks for joining.